I'm Jack Berryman, ACSM historian, and we're here this morning talking with Jere Mitchell. Thank you, Jere, for coming. This is part of ACSM's Distinguished Leaders in Sports Medicine and Exercise Science DVD series. Jere, I just wanted to start with asking you a little bit about your early years, where you grew up and high school days, and were you interested in sports maybe at the time or not? And then where you went to college.
Okay. Well, I was born and grew up in Longview, Texas, which is a town in East Texas, about 120 miles east of Dallas. Okay. And growing up in Texas, you had to play football.
Of course.
And so I was not all that large, but I had to play football, and I did. Played all 3 years in high school.
What were those years, Jere?
That was 1943 to 1946.
Okay.
I was in high school, so I just missed the Second World War.
Yeah.
And in high school, we had a football coach who was really tough and believed in conditioning. So you had to go out for basketball to stay in shape for football, and you had to go out for track. He made us go out for all three, and just keep you busy all the time and staying in shape. And his teams were very good because he pushed us so hard that we were a pretty good second half team when everybody else. Yes, and so we would run the stadium and do all kinds of things, and this would start with pads and hot August in Texas, and so it's amazing more of us didn't get ill, but we did drink water and knew to do that. But,
are they still using those salt tablets then?
Well, we did take salt tablets, and we didn't realize that after you get acclimated, you don't really need to keep taking them, but we did. Yes, yes.
Yeah, I remember. So what kind of? I was always curious in the mid to late 40s. Did you do what we would think of today as conditioning exercises, or did you more just play the sport?
No, we did a lot of conditioning exercises. Yeah, he had us do calisthenics, and then the first few days would be just in shorts and doing nothing but training. And the main thing was running up and down the stadium steps, and that's a pretty good workout doing that. Yeah, but this was before the days we had weight rooms or that sort of thing. So we did push-ups and sit-ups, but no weight calisthenics. Yeah. Okay. And he was really big into not drinking and not smoking, and that stuck with me until the not smoking has stuck my whole life, but not drinking lasted I was about 30. that's a pretty long time. So I was sort of an anomaly in medical school when I didn't drink.
About 18.
Yes.
So did you think about college all through high school, or was that?
Yeah, most people who grew up where I did stayed in Texas to go to school, and went to junior college and such and that. But I wanted to get out of state, and I really hadn't heard about the New England colleges, but I did go to Virginia. I went to Virginia Military Institute, VMI, and I was there from 1946 to 1950. A private all 4 years.
Did you have to wear a uniform?
Oh yeah, constantly.
That's what I thought.
And the first year we had what they call the rat. You were a rat, and it was just like West Point. A tremendous amount of both physical and mental hazing that whole year. And I must say I frequently wondered why the hell I was there.
Why did I do this?
Why did I do this? And but didn't know how to get home, so I stayed there during that.
Was that year round? I mean, were you there in the summer too?
No, just starting
regular
7.
Yeah. Okay. And what were the years you were there then?
46 to 50.
Okay.
And
now, what did you do for a major? Or what
it was called pre-medical chemistry.
Oh, okay.
I knew I was going to be a doctor. At least I thought I was going to be an MD back when I was in high school.
That was another question. We might as well do it now.
Okay.
So tell me a little bit about why.
Well, I had in high school, I remember very well 2 teachers that I had. One was a biology teacher, and one was a physics teacher. And I got very interested in science. And I worked pretty hard for grades when most of the athletes didn't really care about that, but I did. And So I was going to either go to Washington Lee, which is in Lexington, Virginia, or VMI, which is in Lexington, Virginia. And there were two men in my hometown that said, with my straight-laced nature, I'd be better at VMI than I would at Washington Lee, which back in those days was pretty much of a Southern boys' party school. And first year, I could have killed those two guys that told me to go to VMI instead of Washington Lee. But I had met another mentor, the guy who was head of the pre-med department named Colonel Carroll. And he was just a really wonderful teacher. And that sort of got me into caring more about science. My goal had always been to be a general practitioner and go back to Longview, Texas. And they ask me still to this day, when are you going to graduate and come back and be a doctor?
Yeah.
So, but.
Well, that's neat, because I had asked John Bergfeld, and he said, I can't really remember when I decided I wanted to be a doctor. And it was pretty clear to you.
Yeah, pretty early.
And so that way, when you went to VMI, you could do pre-med coursework.
Yep. And VMI was a small school, and I was there at about 1,000 overall, 250 per class. And in the pre-meds, there were about 20 to 25. But this guy was good enough that most of us got into medical schools. Yeah.
And so where did you decide to go?
Well, I looked at a couple of schools in Virginia because I was there, but my family were back in Longview and wanted me to come back to Texas to go to school. And I was kind of ready to go back to Texas too. And the two schools I looked at that time, there were only really 3 medical schools in Texas. One was the University of Texas at Galveston, and one was Baylor, which had just moved from Dallas to Houston, and then they'd started a new medical school in Dallas called Southwestern Medical College. And it was just a beginning school. The classes were in Quonset huts, and that's where I started.
That's where you decided.
That's where I decided to go, and I'm not sure
were
why.
You the first class?
No. The Baylor moved to Houston in 1943, so the first graduating class was 47, but I didn't get there until 1950 and graduated.
You went to Baylor?
No, I went to University of Texas Southwestern Medical
that's
School.
What I thought.
Yeah. But it was just a fledgling school then, and now it's grown to be one of the well-known medical schools in the country right now, UT Southwestern.
Right. Okay. And did you have any idea of a specialty? I guess you said family medicine.
And I thought I'd be just a general practitioner. And then my freshman year in physiology, I got very interested in cardiovascular physiology. And in fact, then when I got to be a junior, instead of taking my rotation in medicine, I took 3 months off and taught in the physiology department for that year. And really enjoyed that. I wore the white coat and enjoyed being a professor, even though I was one of the students. And that kind of began to make me think about maybe something, academic and research, because I did a little bit of research that year. And then when I got to be a junior in medical school, a fellow named Clayton Chapman moved down, and he'd been a Rhodes Scholar, medical school, Harvard. Then he was in Minnesota at the Laboratory of Physiological Hygiene with Ansel Keys and all those people, and was very well trained in exercise physiology. And he came to Dallas when I was a junior in medical school, and I met him and was enamored by him, and he put a treadmill in the basement of Parkland Hospital and started some exercise studies.
What year was that?
This was 1953 he came,
Okay.
but I finished medical school in 54, and then I did an internship and residency. And then I started what was called a fellowship in cardiology. But this was 1956 to 1958. And a fellowship in cardiology, all you learned to do was read an EKG, but there was no echoes, there was no left heart cath then. The surgeons did the left heart cath by going directly into the chest with a needle, and we learned to do right heart cath. But I spent my 2 years starting studies in exercise physiology in people, with Chapman. Okay. And we did these studies on maximal oxygen uptake, with catheters and the brachial artery, the brachial vein, and down the femoral vein. And that was kind of unheard of in those days to be doing those kind of invasive experiments. But that's what I did for 2 years.
Was Chapman an MD or PhD?
He was an MD.
He was an
yeah,
MD.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder how he got interested in exercise.
I really don't know I don't know the answer to
I
that.
thought maybe
Well, I do it a little
mentioned
bit.
it to you
Yeah,
at
no,
one
I
time.
do know now that he did a DPhil. He got a Rhodes Scholarship, so his first 2 years of medical school were at Oxford.
Okay.
And that was the tutorial system. And he worked with a guy named C.G. Douglas, who was a respiratory physiologist, and early on started doing some research. Then he came back, and Harvard gave him credit for the first 2 years of medical school, except he had pathology. And he took pathology and then went on through, and then he became a cardiologist, but very interested in exercise physiology,
Okay.
and that's why he went to Minnesota to be with Ansel.
With Keys.
Yes,
Yeah,
Ansel
perfect.
Keys. Yeah.
Perfect
yeah,
match.
Yeah. And so when he came to Dallas, that was very good timing for me. And so I did 2 years of postdoctoral fellowship in cardiology with him. And during that period of time, a guy named Dr. Stanley J. Sarnoff, who was a cardiovascular physiologist and had just moved to the National Institutes of Health to start a lab called the Laboratory of Cardiovascular Physiology. He came down to Dallas and was watching me do an experiment. And he said, what are you going to do next year? And I said, well, I've been on what they call the Berry plan. I've been getting deferred each year to be able to keep on training, but then you owed Uncle Sam 2 years. So I was going to go down to San Antonio and be just a regular doctor treating whatever came in.
At the Air Force.
Yeah, it'd been in the Army, probably in San Antonio.
Oh, okay.
And Sarnoff said to me, why don't you come work with me those 2 years, and you could be in the public health service and get your service time off. And at that time, many guys who later on stayed in academic medicine went to the NIH. We were called the Yellow Berets because we were, we were getting our draft time off by doing research. And that started many of us in our academic career. And instead of staying there just 2 years at the NIH, I actually stayed there 4 years.
Was that in Bethesda?
Uh-huh.
Is it the same? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And what were those years?
And that was 58 to 62.
Okay.
And I was in the public health service and doing all animal studies and working on Starling's law of the heart and ventricular function curves, and didn't do much exercise work those 4 years. But Sarnoff sort of wanted me to stay and up there. But I'd been trained as a doctor, and so I wasn't seeing any patients, and I wasn't doing any teaching. I mean, every day you'd go in and do a dog experiment.
It's all lab.
All lab. Yeah. And things don't always go well. And so and also we had all the equipment and all the money that we needed. And so when experiments weren't going well, you think about, now what am I doing in my life? What am I contributing? And so I said, I better go back where when my research isn't going well, I at least will be seeing patients or teaching students. So I decided to go back and looked at jobs, one job here in Indianapolis at the University of Indiana, and one in Emory, and then looked at back with Clayton Chapman in Dallas, and they wanted me to come back there, so I went back to Dallas in '62, where I'd done the work before.
And what institution was that?
About UT Southwestern.
Okay.
It had grown quite a bit by that time.
So you went back then in a faculty position?
In '62.
Okay.
And so really, when they sent us off, they sent many guys off to different places to do their service, and many of us went back and joined the faculty there in Southwestern. And that was because of the chairman of medicine, who was Dr. Donald Selden. And he was sort of like a Pied Piper and attracted us all to come back to Dallas after we'd finished our training.
Very neat. That would be exciting.
Yeah.
Was Larry Rowell doing anything at that time?
I remember the first time I met Larry Rowell, because I had done this work on maximal oxygen uptake. And I can't remember exactly what it was, but we went to an American Heart meeting, and Dr. Chapman and I were going to give a little symposium on the work that we did, and it was just kind of low key. And then Larry Rao, I forgot what it was he got upset about, but he started complaining about something, and we got sort of in a discussion about this, more heated than I thought we were going to have at that meeting, but that was Larry.
Yeah.
And so that was my first introduction to him.
Okay.
And then stayed with Chapman from 1962 to 1967. I was with him, but in 1965 we wanted to do this Dallas bed rest and training study, and so in 1965 he went recruiting to Stockholm and brought back Bink Saltine and Gunnar Blomqvist. So those two guys came, and with me and Chapman, we did the bed rest and training study, which was published in 1968, and that was
a classic.
Yeah, you've heard of it?
Oh yeah.
Okay, yeah, we took college students and put them to bed for 3 weeks. They were in bed like a myocardial infarction patient was treated then. They could sit up in bed, shave, but they couldn't weight bear, and they had to use a bedside commode. And we then, after that, we took these same 5 guys and put them into an 8 weeks boot camp training type thing. So we were just asking the question, with a given phenotype, how much can you, with a given genotype, how much can you change the phenotype by going from inactivity, which was bed rest, to activity? How much can you change the cardiovascular and pulmonary performance? And we were just asking that as a basic science question. We weren't trying to cure anything or do anything with this work, but it turned out that the people deteriorated so much during 3 weeks of bed rest that they acted like they'd had a heart attack, even though they hadn't. So we decided that maybe that's not the best way to treat a person who had a heart attack. And so after that, people were getting out of bed as soon as they could. And then the 8 weeks training program showed you how much you can bring the system up the other direction. And that was kind of set the stage for cardiac rehabilitation. So a study that we did just for the basic science curiosity really turned into have some clinical significance.
Jerry, that reminds me, and I've heard this story, it may not be that accurate, when President Eisenhower had his heart attack. I heard that they called Paul Dudley White.
Yes, exactly right.
And basically said, get up.
That's right.
Which was what, mid-50s?
Yeah, he had him walking around the hospital floor and all of this. But Paul Dudley White, was one of the early people who said, you ought to be riding bicycles, you ought to be doing something, you ought to be active. And he was one of the first ones. And if you read some of his writings, it sounds like something we'd written today. Yeah. But everybody thought he was going to kill Eisenhower by getting him up so quick, letting him start playing golf again so quick. But that's changed the whole way we treat him.
And I guess he did that without the kind of data that you guys. That's
right. He just had the feeling. Produced. He just had the feeling that that's the way it ought to be.
Exerciser himself.
Oh yeah. And this in the old days when you had a baby, you were kept in the hospital for about 2 weeks, flat on your back, and after surgery, you weren't gotten up for days. And I think now you're up and out as quick as you can.
Didn't you was it you and Chapman that did that big bibliography? There was a document that Chapman did.
I was not part of that. You're quite right.
I've used that.
Yeah. He was, having gone to Oxford, he was quite scholarly, and it's really funny because my 2 mentors, Clayton Chapman and then Stanley Sarnoff, Clayton Chapman made you go to the library, and by the time you read everything, you said, there's nothing for us to do. What experiment are we going to do? And then you'd try to build on something somebody else had done. Sarnoff was just the opposite. We just started doing an experiment. He said, I want to see these things with my own hands, and we would do a study, then go find out a lot of it had already been done, and then we would go further. But we'd always start out just working in the lab.
Sort of what he thought might be a good idea.
Exactly. Yeah.
So when along the way, Jerry, did you hear about ACSM?
We had in 1965. There was a gift given to Dallas for the Weinbergers, and we started what was called the Weinberger Laboratory. It was the top 2 floors of a building, and it was sort of patterned after the Harvard Fatigue Lab. That's what we were supposed to do, and we put out some publications on this. And that year, just after we moved into those lab spaces, we didn't even have the equipment in yet. We were just in the empty rooms almost. The American College of Sports Medicine met in Dallas, and it must have been 63, 64 along in there. And we had buses, and we brought the whole meeting out to see our labs, because the meeting was pretty small back that day in Dallas. You could look up. I just forget what year it was in Dallas.
Yeah, I could look it
but they've had their meetings in Dallas several times.
Yeah,
and,
well, I have to look at my chronology too. Was Joe Wolf still living then? I wonder.
I don't know.
Because a lot of their, Hyman and Bishop and Wolf were all cardiologists.
Yes.
I just wondered if any of those guys were
No, Wolf was very active also, not only in the American College of Sports Medicine, but also the American College of Cardiology. He was very early in both of those. And I was very pleased when I got to give the Wolf lecture many years ago. So,
well, I've heard your name so much, so often, and I know that you have a phenomenal grant record and NIH funding. And could you talk a little bit about?
Well, Chapman got a program project grant in 1962, one of the first program project grants, and it was about eight pages or 9 pages. That was the whole grant application, and he asked for something like maybe $400,000 or $500,000 a year or something like that. And they came back and said, "Don't you want more money? This is not quite enough." And so he redid the budget and got more money. And that grant got started in 1962, and actually the grant got started in 1960, and I came there in 1962.
So he had it.
He'd had it, and so from 60 to 67 he had it, but in 1967. After us moving into this beautiful new facility and just having done the bed rest and training study, he ups and moves to Dartmouth to be the dean of the medical school. And that was a real challenge because Dartmouth had been, I think, the first medical school in the country. But more recently, they had stopped and just had the first 2 years of basic science, and they sent everybody to Boston or someplace else to do their last 2 years, and they decided they wanted to make it a 4-year school again, and he was brought to Dartmouth, and he sort of brought in the English way of coming from college and coming from high school and starting both college and medical school at the same time to make it about a 6-year program of college and medical school, and he got very interested in doing that. So he left, and I had not been doing much clinical work. I had 4 years of nothing but dogs in Bethesda, and then the bed rest and training study, and I wasn't seeing hardly any patients. But the chairman of medicine, Dr. Selden, came to me when he left and said, "Now, do you want to be head of cardiology?" And I thought, no, it's not. I'm not qualified to be head of cardiology, but I didn't want somebody else coming in telling me what to do, and so I became head of cardiology at UT Southwestern, and did that for 2 years by myself. But then I got somebody to come in and be the clinical head, and we were co-chairman of cardiology. And the guy I brought down was a guy named Lawrence Cohen, who from Yale, and he'd been at the NIH, and then after 2 years in Dallas, he was offered to be head of cardiology at Yale. So he left me, and I had another co-director, and then finally I just got out of that. But that grant kept going until I kept it until about 97 or 98, and then gave it to a guy named Sandy Williams, who funded it for 5 years, and then we got it refunded one more time for 5 years. So it went for quite a few years.
Was that, early on, did they have the sections in NIH? Was that heart and lung, or what?
When I was there, it was just the National Heart Institute.
Okay.
And then it became the National Heart and Lung Institute.
Okay.
And now it's the National Heart, Lung, and Blood
Okay.
Institute.
But that's the fund, that was the route
Yeah,
for the
that's where it came
funding?
from. Yes, yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Now, when you became head of cardiology, you were still probably very active in your research?
Yeah.
You kept that going?
Yeah, that's why I didn't want to be head of cardiology. That's why I
Right.
didn't want to be head of cardiology. I wanted to do just the research
Yeah.
and the teaching and not have to see
Yeah.
any patients.
Yeah.
But,
Did you then start to attract fellows and individuals that said, hey, I want to do
Yeah.
this kind of research?
yeah, I had.
This is the place.
I didn't have many pre-doctoral fellows, but I had a lot of postdoctoral fellows, and a lot of them are here at this meeting
I
right now.
wondered
Yes,
about
yes,
that,
and
yeah.
took both MDs and PhDs as postdocs.
And you had a lot of them. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
Other than your bed rest study, I know a lot of them. You've done some landmark studies.
Well,
along the way.
after about 1970, then a new guy came in and was head of cardiology, and I became the director of something called the Moss Heart Center. But I wanted to take a year of sabbatical, and so I went to Oxford for a year, and then I got interested in, well, I had already gotten interested in the neural control of the circulation during exercise, how reflexes coming back from the exercising muscles and all things coming down from the brain. I wanted to investigate that, and spent a year in Oxford, and that kind of started my career more into neural circulatory control.
A new career.
Yes,
sort of.
yes.
Did you bring that
Back, yeah, and that's what I've worked in ever since. Yep, yep.
Okay.
No, it's just really amazing. You know, when you start to exercise, if you look at it, when you start, the first beat of your heart after you start exercising, the RR interval is already short. In other words, your heart's already speeded up as soon as you initiate exercise. Many years ago, Dr. Krogh and Lenhart did a study where they put electrodes on people's bodies and stimulated them so they weren't making the muscles contract. The muscles contracted themselves.
So they were thinking they were exercising.
They were exercising, and so they asked the question, if you do it that way, do you still get this initiation and heart rate so quickly? And you almost get it just as quickly coming from the muscle receptors. So there's these two redundant systems that are regulating the cardiovascular system.
Or muscle stimulus.
Yeah. And that's all I thought about for a while, but then Peter Raven convinced me that there was also something called the baroreceptors, which I thought were only active at rest, but he showed that they were really having a role during exercise. So now we know that there are three neural mechanisms regulating your heart rate and blood pressure and cardiac output during exercise.
Did you publish in MSSE early on? Was that a good outlet for you?
Yeah, we had one thing on cardiovascular abnormalities in the athlete that was published as a symposium in ACSM, and I've published quite a bit in there. Yeah.
And now did you go mainstream physiology, cardiology with any of your work? Or what?
You know, I don't know what I'm going to be when I grow up, because I've been interested in cardiovascular physiology, exercise physiology, and also the autonomic nervous system and how it regulates the circulation. So I really work in all three of these sort of areas.
So depending on what you're doing that day, it might go to that journal. Or
Yes.
And I imagine you've done a lot of sessions here over the years.
Yes.
ACSM. Did you ever get involved in the Texas chapter of the college?
Yeah, I went to their meeting last night and was involved down there for a while, but haven't been involved the last few years.
Yeah. And you haven't retired?
I'm working half-time.
You are?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I have several young people, and we've still got some grants, and so I'm going to keep going for a while.
Yeah.
I'm only 85, so.
Well, you've got a long ways to go yet,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Well, Jerry, thank you so
Oh,
much.
certainly, certainly. Thank you so much.
It's really nice meeting you for
Nice-
the first
yeah.
time. I've heard so much about you all these years.
It's been enjoying. You're a very good interviewer.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay.